Salam tana, Taina Yisterling, Ine Ras Yadinos Teferi Nang. This is Ras Yadinos Wendem Yaden. And what we're going to do is, since we are in the Fasika period, first thing I want to say is Melkam Fasika, Melkam Tinsai, the Tinsai Ehud, or Resurrection Sunday, or the first day, the resurrection day, was often called Easter, or we would say Aster Sunday, or Resurrection Sunday. And if you consult the Kenakotater, you will recognize that Ethiopically and the Christian sense, this is what is known as Resurrection Sunday, or falsely because of a mistranslation in King James Bible, they call this Easter Sunday. We call this Tinsai, the Tinsai Ehud, or resurrection first day. Ehud means the first day. Now, we've been touching on some of the portions, the Sabbath readings that due to this holy season we did not touch on in detail as we have with other sabbatical studies, and some of that also has to be hopefully uploaded perhaps to the new audio MP3 online pages that we are currently working on, and that covers the chapters 13, 14, and 15, and that basically covers a portion of the 27th Sabbath reading, Bitar Regiz, the Tazria, Leviticus 12 to Leviticus 12 and 13, Haya Sement, Bemena Tzatu Ken, or the Day of Cleansing, Metzora, which is Leviticus 14 to Leviticus 15. And what we want to now touch on is the two Sabbaths that we have not touched on, the previous Sabbath, or last week's Sabbath, not yesterday, since this is the 24th of April. We're not speaking about yesterday, the 23rd, which was the Kedusan or Kedoshim, which is 19 and 20, but we're going to touch on 16, 17, and 18, or what is titled the Haya Zetang, 29th Senbet, or Kamotu Bechwala, or in the Hebrew Acharei Mot. And you see there's an Aster or Asterix, there's an Esther or Aster there. And in our sabbatical reading booklet, yes, in Tawi Senbet Orit Minbab, or actually Nibab or Minbab, both of them are readings. So what you should have already made notes of, if you were up to your studies, as the Dekam as a Morit should be up to their studies, making the notations and the composition notebooks, the study notebooks, and want to advise our brothers and sisters who are seriously interested in discipleship that the independent and intensive study means that one should have at least 2 livicated or dedicated notebooks at this very time. Other notebooks as necessary would be announced, but one is for the sabbatical, the Sabbath studies, the weekly sabbatical portion, the readings, and other related teachings, and another one for the Amharic studies, for the language studies, the linguistic studies, practice with the language and other studies. So 2 particular notebooks. This doesn't mean that in the sabbatical studies notebooks or in Amharic won't be there, but the other notebook, the Amharic Debter or composition notebook, is specifically for the Amharic related study, like the ABHS, the Amharic Bible studies. Now, just to cover this particular subject matter, make a note or notation of this. Chapters 13, 14, and 15 all continues to cover the holy God and holy people relationship that is first brought into light in chapter 11 of Orit Ze Lewawian, or from the Senbet studies Besementenyawim, and Leviticus 9 to Leviticus 11, which is the 26th Senbet Kuful, or weekly Torah sabbatical portion. That's where we began this particular section. Now, also you should have already downloaded and have available either a hard copy or at least a digital copy of the Schofield Study or Reference Bible for the disciples in our discipleship and Bible studies, the English study. The English Study Bible is the Schofield Study Bible, and we have a digital portion which ones can download for free from www.lojsociety.org. So what you should have already downloaded and have to utilize, at least print out the Sabbath reading, which is about 13 or so pages. The Schofield Study Bible, probably more cost effective to purchase a copy. One can go to our recommended books and the books at Line of Judah, lojsociety.org, and can either acquire it through our services or can also get it from their local Bible bookstore and can see the particular edition that we study from and that we recommend. Now, with that being said, this holy God and holy people relationship begins off in chapter 11, as we covered, with their food, or what's called the dietary regulation, which we as Rastafari know as the Levity regulations, the Levity of the Rastafari and the covenant people, Levity. Now, in chapter 12, it touches on the law of motherhood, the second important factor in the holy God and holy people relationship. First is food. Secondly is motherhood, the laws concerning motherhood. Thirdly, very interestingly enough, in chapter 13 is the holy God and the holy people relationship that touches on leprosy as a type of a sin, and there are numerous studied notes and references. We've touched on some of this, but we're just pointing this out as an overview. So those who are just catching this will at least know what to study up on, and the Schofield has some excellent notes that can at least ground ones in some of the basic teachings of His Majesty and the scripture teaching on this particular matter concerning leprosy. Now, what we've mentioned before is that though leprosy in chapter 13 is a very important chapter concerning describing leprosy, and here's where we learn the origin of the so-called white race or the European out of the black race, that old time leprosy, which, as chapter 13 would actually describe, it actually mentions this recessive genetic disorder which is known as, nowadays they say vitiligo. Vitiligo is actually a form of it. Now, there's two types of leprosy. There's the physical leprosy and there is the spiritual leprosy. Europeans or white folks are, you could say, genetically related to the physical type of leprosy. Modern majority of white folks nowadays could be considered clean lepers. You understand, when the leprosy has covered the entirety of the body as one sort of skin type or racial type. But what chapter 13 actually describes is leprosy. So what is leprosy? I think we do need to cover this because some folks are only familiar with leprosy in its modern forms, or the so-called modern forms of leprosy. And in the modern form of leprosy, the modern forms of leprosy are known as, let's just go over this for a moment, the modern forms of leprosy, because they're talking about the King James Bible, the 400th anniversary of the King James Bible, this week or this month around this time. But we have albinism. Under albinism, we have forms of like cancers. There are skin cancers, and all this comes out of this old time leprosy that's being pointed out here in Leviticus chapter 13. We have melanoma, we have psoriasis, we have lupus, erythematosus, we have elephantitis, eczema, kyphosis, or what's known as humpback or hunchback disease. Like they just had this thing on CBS News about the hunchback of Notre Dame, or Notre Dame, of the Great Lady. You understand? As they call it, we have dermatitis folliculitis, pseudofolliculitis barbae, which is also otherwise known as shaving bumps. Yes, these are the byproducts, the modern byproducts of that old time disease that is known as leprosy. But leprosy is an infectious bacterial disease that's caused by the mycobacterium leprae, what's known as leprae. This bacteria, it produces lesions in the skin tissue and nerves and causes ulcers and sores on the body. Leprosy is also called Hansen's disease. It sounds like Ham's sons disease, because it was Canaan that was cursed. It was not Ham or Kam, the Kamites or the ancient black Egyptians in that sense that was cursed, but it was the children of the so-called ancient Kamites or Egyptians that were cursed with this skin disease. And the majority of the Gentile nations basically come out of that Canaanite and the Canaanitish stock. Now, other subject matters that need to be understood in connection with this is the pathology of leprosy. There's a pathology of leprosy. Leviticus chapter 13 basically goes into that pathology of leprosy when it speaks about when a man shall have in the skin of his flesh a rising scab or a bright spot, and it be in the skin of his flesh like the plague of leprosy, then he shall be brought to Aaron the priest, or to one of his sons the priest. And as we go through the details of this is the devil's in the details, it basically breaks down into two particular things: the modern day pale man or the white man, the Caucasian, the Caucasian, the Canaanite, being of that particular seed. And the manifestation of the curse of leprosy is interesting when we look at the dominant gene, or the black gene, Adam's descendant, and the recessive gene, or the Canaanites, when we break it down. For example, in leprosy, blonde hair becomes manifest. Straight hair becomes manifest. Albinism, which is the absence of melanin or the skin pigmentation. Blue or gray eyes is also one of the byproducts of that recessive genetic disorder. With thin lips and small eyes. On the opposite side, we have the dark brown to black hair instead of blonde hair. We have the nappy hair, or the curly, the wavy, the kingly, or the kinky hair. As opposed to straight hair, we have what we know as normal skin pigmentation, or the original skin pigmentation, either brown or caramel or black. We have brown, black, or hazel eyes, as opposed to blue or gray eyes. We have broad, or relatively speaking, broad to thinner than broad lips, as opposed to thin to no lips. Then, and relative to eyes, we have large eyes or slanted eyes, and not small eyes. Now, some of this is very much detailed subject matters, and as we establish ourselves, we can go into more of the details of this. We're just giving some of the overview. So in this particular chapter, we have the white skin, the European skin, concerning the disease of leprosy, where it says in Leviticus chapter 13 verse 4, it says, if the bright spot be white in the skin of his flesh, and in the sight be not deeper than the skin, and the hair thereof be not turned white, then the priest shall shut up him that hath the plague 7 days. Now, that is now concerning the skin type that Leviticus chapter 13 points out, where it describes the traits of the old time leprosy. The second matter is the blonde or the straight hair. The blonde or the straight hair in Leviticus chapter 13 verse 30, where it says, then the priest shall see the plague, and behold, if it be in sight deeper than the skin, and there be in it a yellow thin hair, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a dry scald, even a leprosy upon the beard, or the head or the beard. So the head or the beard, speaking about the hairs of the head or the beard. Now, even they say the Quran of the Muslim, it testifies in connection with the skin type and the hair type. It testifies to the blue eyes, where in the Quran, chapter 20, verse 102, it says, on that day, which some Muslim scholars have interpreted to be the last day, or what the Muslims call Yomul Akhiri, the last day, when the trumpet will be blown. They interpret by the angelic being, the angel Raphael, or we know as Rufael. And on that day, the last day, we, speaking of Allah and his angelic beings, or in the Arabic, the Allahumma, which is the Elohim, will gather the guilty blue-eyed, Now, all the translators of the Quran accept this and use its real meaning, the real meanings of this in their commentaries concerning the guilty blue-eyed, or what the Nation of Islam has often called the blue-eyed devil. Not because he has blue eyes or blonde hair or white skin, but because of his attitude, his behavior, his inhuman and, as you say, apathos, his apathological, his without feeling behavior. Now, as we go into this chapter here, it's very, very important to understand that we have the old-time leprosy, and then we have the more modern forms of leprosy. In general, persons with black skin suffer from the same skin conditions as those with pale skin, although they are less apt to get skin cancer. On the other hand, members of the black race have a greater chance of developing keloid scars. So when we get into the details of this, there's much scientific knowledge that can be found, and even the scientific data that is not studied from a biblical perspective, it backs up, actually, when rightly applied, what the Bible has said in its simple but accurate wisdom. But just make a note of this, that the old-time leprosy has produced in latter days and times. Like, for example, when we go into albinism, what is albinism? Albinism is the absence of pigment in the skin, hair, and eye. The skin, hair, and eyes. Notice the scripture speaks about the skin, the hair, and the eyes, partial or total. Albinism is a hereditary condition in which an organism cannot produce pigment. An organism cannot produce color, cannot produce the black, the reddish brown, or black color. Now, albinism is a result of the curse of leprosy, or old-time leprosy, that was placed on the Canaanu, or the Canaanites, and even amongst the Israelites, the mixed multitude. There was this condition. This is one reason why we find it in Leviticus. He was born albino and gave birth to the pale, or the European, the Caucasus Asian race. Now, Canaan did not know why he was pale and scabby, since everyone else was black. The Canaanites didn't know with black. They were black with smooth skin, but he was pale, he was scabby, his hair was yellow, he was an albino. Because of this, he was shunned and persecuted, especially among many of the ancient peoples and cultures, because they said, well, what is this? How come he's so different? There's something wrong with him. Therefore, him and his people, eventually, much of the people, especially those who had turned leprous or albino, were affected by the hereditary condition of albinism. They fled to the Caucasus Mountain, because also the condition in that Middle Eastern region is very hot. The sun persecuted them, so they had to flee to the colder climates, and they lived in the caves, where the cold climate protected his skin from the hot sun, and the darkness was favorable to his eyes, which were sensitive to the direct illumination of the sun. Now, according to some of the Muslim scholars in their Quranic studies, they say that the appearance of the Canaanites at this time was such that you would run away from them in fright, according to Al-Quran, or El's Quran 18 and 18. Now, if you look at some of these Canaanites nowadays, you will see that they are slowly but surely returning, or reverting, or recessing, or retrograding back to their original form, or to their more diseased form. their bodies are curled over from overgrowths and deformities, with everything from liver spots, the liver spots, the yellowish brownish spots on the skin, following some digestive disorder. Now, these are your clean lepers. This is the modern Europeans that we see. Majority, according to the Bible, are what we would define as the clean lepers of the Bible. Leviticus Orit Lewawian, chapter 13, verse 39, it says, "Then the priest shall look, and behold, if the bright spots in the skin of their flesh be darkish white, it is a freckled spot, that groweth in the skin. If a freckled spot grows in the skin, he is clean." Now, this may also explain why among Europeans having freckles, the whole mythology and psychology of having freckles, because the Bible says in 13 and 39 of Leviticus that this kind is a clean one. So lepers can either be of the clean or the unclean kind, because they may be in a clean state. The leper may go unnoticed, as many of the modern day clean lepers or white folks basically do today. But in spite of this, there are still modern day symptoms. There are symptoms of that old time leprosy that coincide with those that the Metzhaf, that the scriptures, that the Orit, that the Torah basically describe. We have everything from cancer, and these are all very interesting. For example, let's go into this because it's important that we touch on this now, so we have a reference point for those who will come afterward, who will seek to study these matters and get a better understanding. If we look at cancer, skin cancer, what's called basal cell carcinoma. Basal cell carcinoma, it arises from the lower layer of the epidermis. So remember the Bible talking about if it be deeper, if it be deep, if it not be so deep, because the lower layer of the epidermis, the skin on the hair follicles. Because cancer is a disease that is a result of the curse of the old time leprosy. It can, or limts dewe, you understand, it can appear at any time in any individual. Canaanites, or the Kanaanu, the modern Canaanites, or the European, the Caucasus Asian, the Caucasians are prone to this disease because they carry it. They carry part of it already in their genes, being clean lepers descending from unclean lepers in the old time leprosy. So that means some of their people became clean, but they still have the latent characteristics, and certain things, whether in food and environment and thought and habit and behavior, can bring these things out again. Now, cancer generally appears on the sun-exposed areas of the body because the Kanaanu try to suntan their frail and their pale skin in order to be dark. They are very susceptible, extremely susceptible to this disease. And there's a bunch of stuff every time it gets hot. They're talking about these things on every channel all the time. Now, the destruction of the ozone layer is also very much a cause, because the destruction of the ozone layer in the atmosphere is allowing more deadly sun rays to penetrate, and it will affect all of the Kanaanu, which love to sunbathe or sun worship. They are the sun worshipers. They worship the sun. Now you can see the connection with those who, when it said, Moses said, if you lift up your eyes to the sun, the moon, and the stars, and be driven to worship them like all the heathen do. The heathen even then were sun worshipers, because they saw immediately, some saw the connection that if they stayed in the sun long enough, their skin would get a little dark, and they'll become like the original shits, the original, like they originally were at one time. What's very interesting about this is such a psychology to this, that it behooves us to understand it, because it can help us to understand the white man and what the white man, in a sense, is going through. You understand, and how to deal and overcome and to dominate, in a sense, the white man, because the white man needs to be dominated. He already is showing you, half the time he don't know what he's doing. You understand? But we allow him to do ignorantly against the earth, the humanity. I mean, look at the state of the earth right now. This ruin is his ruin. But the destruction of the ozone layer in the atmosphere is allowing more deadly sun rays to penetrate, and this is what's affecting majority Europeans so much, who are sun worshippers and love to sunbathe, as they say. This form of skin cancer usually appears as a small wavy nodule with rolled translucent pearly border anywhere in the body. What's interesting about this, if you look in 2 Kings, put a note down, my brothers and sisters, 2 Kings chapter 20 verses 1 and verse 7, you will see a very much a likeness of what's described in modern scientific textbooks concerning skin cancer. Now, the next disease disease that comes from the old time leprosy, when it became clean, a clean form, is what we know as albinism. But now what is derived from this recessive genetic trait, in addition to cancer, is what's known as melanoma. Melanoma is a malignant and the most deadliest kind of skin cancer among the Kana'anu. It is often signaled by a change in an orderly mole. They may have a mole in any part of the body. Now the mole, it grows darker. The mole grows wider and thicker, becoming irregular in shape, and then it begins to itch. Sometimes it hurts, and then it also may bleed. From this stage, it can spread to other parts of the body, and this is how it becomes a fatal and a deadly disease. This is melanoma we're speaking about, which comes from that old time leprosy described in Genesis, in Genesis is pointing to it, but actually it's described in detail in Leviticus chapter 13. Now this mole, the mole can be surgically removed, but it does not mean that another mole won't become cancerous after this disease first appears. So this is what they sometimes do nowadays. They remove it, the person gets better, is healed, but sometimes they have a where they retrograde, where they like remission or something, not remission, what they call it when it goes back. Yeah. Now melanoma counted for, you understand, back in 1989, according to this account that actually we reference from the Ansar cult, The Rebuttal to Slanderers, edition 197, by the doctor who's known as Dr. York or Imam Isa, because a lot of this information is right on point, and we as black people may have differences with other black people, but if they are right about some things, we should give credit where credit is due. Here in this book, he says that melanoma accounted for 5,800 deaths in the year 1989 AD. It has become the most common cancer among the Kana'anu between the ages of 25 and 29, and is rapidly increasing. You can refer to Leviticus 13 and 8, where it says, "And if the priest see that, behold, the scab spreadeth in the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean." It is a leprosy. Notice, it is a type of leprosy. We're going to touch on the type of leprosy that most people probably think, because that's how the white man wants you to think, that the only type of leprosy is in like certain parts of Africa and certain parts of India when people get elephantitis, but that's not the only kind. That's a more radical metastasized form. But the next kind of leprosy is psoriasis. You probably heard about psoriasis a lot in the news. One of the most common skin diseases whose cause is also leprosy. This disease affects adults more commonly than children. Psoriasis reoccurs during the summer and the winter months. Initially, there is a bright red, sharply defined, elevated lesion covered with a thick, dry, silvery scale. The affecting areas are the elbows, the knees, the scalp, the nails, and lower back. Because it is a disease carried in the genes predominantly of the Kana'anu, the Canaanite, it cannot be cured. Now, when we look at Leviticus 13 and 43, let's go to Leviticus 13 and 43. It says, "Then the priest shall look upon it, and behold, if the rising of the sore be white reddish in his bald head, or in his bald forehead, as the leprosy appeareth in the skin of the flesh. Verse 44, he is a leprous man, he is unclean. The priest shall pronounce him utterly, completely, befitzum, unclean. His plague is in his head. You know, when the Bible says in this end time generation, the whole head, the whole man is sick from head to toe. It's a plague in his head. Now, there is lupus erythematosus. Lupus erythematosus. This is a form of leprosy that is no longer considered rare. But one time it was rare. Lupus. You hear a lot about lupus. They're talking about, what would you have for lupus? You understand? But they don't want to tell you the root and the cause. You understand? Still lying and still hiding they are. Lupus is characterized by spontaneous, quote, flare-ups. People get spontaneous flare-ups, and is initiated by sunlight. This is why they tell people you gotta not be in the sun too long, have skin blocks over sun, because they know the connection between lupus, the spontaneous flare-ups, and the initiation by the sunlight and exposure to ultraviolet light. Also recognized by the characteristic so-called butterfly rash that's often found on the face of Canaanites. Now, major body organs and systems are involved due to invasion. There's an invasion by immune complexes. Systemic inflammation results, and joint inflammation or arthritis. So there's an arthritical connection to this lupus. There's lupus arthritis can be deforming. Something called lupus arthritis can be deforming. But look at the scripture. Let's go to Leviticus 13 and 28. What does it say? And if the bright spot stay in his place, and spread not in the skin, but it be somewhat dark, it is a rising of the burning, and the priest shall pronounce him clean, for it is an inflammation of the burning. It's an inflammation of the burning. So the connection there that we find in scripture, what modern science tells us, is that inflammation. You understand? When it speaks about the burning in the Bible, scientifically, that would be what we call inflammation. Because when you understand it scientifically, in simple language, we may call it inflammation, but look at the word flamation. Inflaming. It's flaming up. You know what I mean? Make those connections there. Now, to get to this modern type of leprosy, or what's called leprosy now, what the white people love to say, oh, these black people in Africa got leprosy. Look at their feet and their body parts that become so deformed. Or the people in India, we got to raise money and help them. And they say that this is leprosy. But they don't tell you that them being white, they're white and they're clean lepers. So see the European, the white man is very dishonest like that. This way he shows his devilishness. You understand? He want to act like he just has, you know, the sun affects his skin and he has to use suntan lotion. It has nothing to do with it has everything to do with leprosy. But elephantitis, most dangerous diseases. Remember that reggae song, right? The most dangerous diseases. This form of cancer is a form of cancer. It attacks the skin, which becomes rough, like the hide of an elephant. Such why they call it elephantitis. It is primary. In its primary stages, nodules appear in the skin and swell up whichever part of the body is affected. These nodules never go away, and since they are easily infected, they spread, they enlarge rapidly. Recurring infection in the nodules makes them permanently enlarged. This recurring, so it keeps infecting more than it can be disinfected. There is no cure for elephantitis because, like all other forms of cancer, it is a disease that is carried in the genes. It is a genetic recessive disorder. They will need a gene transplant, in other words. So this is what also affects the Canaanites. And what's interesting is that Leviticus chapter 13, 9 to 13 says something very interesting on this that we want to put into the record. Verse 9 says, when the plague of leprosy is in a man, then he shall be brought to the priest, and the priest shall see him, And behold, look and see if the rising be white in the skin, and it have turned the hair white, and there be quick raw flesh in the rising. It is an old leprosy. You see that when we say old time, that's what we mean, old leprosy. Verse 11. It's an old leprosy in the skin of his flesh, and the priest shall pronounce him unclean, and shall not shut him up, for he is unclean. In other words, not going to shut him up for healing, but basically pronounce him unclean. And if a leprosy break out abroad in the skin, and the leprosy cover all the skin of him that hath the plague, from his head even to his foot, wheresoever the priest looketh, then the priest shall consider, and behold, if the leprosy have covered all his flesh, he shall pronounce him clean that hath the plague. It is all turned white. He is clean. He is clean. If it if it turns white, if he's white all over, then he is clean, vis-a-vis his genetic recessive condition. You understand? His genetic recessive condition. These are only a few of the modern day diseases that go unrecognized purposely. The European establishment, you understand, purposely does not want to own up and recognize that this is exactly the connection with leprosy. You understand? But the list can also go on to some other forms of leprosy that I think is important for you to understand are forms of leprosy. And it's interesting because a lot of we so-called black skin, brown skin, caramel skin people seem to somehow be affected more or less by this. For example, there are eczema. There is kyphosis, or so-called humpback. There is dermatitis. There is folliculitis. There is pseudofolliculitis barbae, which is shaving bumps. First of all, you know, I and I as Hebrew males, you know, we're told we shouldn't be marring the corners of our beard. But for those who do that and gain shaving bumps, it's very interesting to see the connection. All of these are later forms. Remember, diseases are living things. They adapt, they change over time. So when it's untreated or it's left dormant, or other things like the destruction of the ozone layer. So in a sense, the European, the white man, the Caucasian has actually brought on his own curse. It's not the Almighty that's cursing him, but he's destroying the ozone layer and allowing more ultraviolet rays to get in, which is initiating a lot of these outbreaks of cancer and skin disease in him. So he's actually causing this to himself. Many of these diseases recur due to a lot of exposure to sunlight. Now that the ozone layer is said to be deteriorating at such a rapid rate, these diseases are going to show up more and more rapidly. Now the devil, Satan, and the evildoers and their puppet people, which white people have been the puppet people for the devil and Satan, not alone, but majorly. You know, the devil is slowly destroying the ozone layer, causing more radioactive, ultraviolet light to pass through into our Earth atmosphere from the sun. And since the Kana'anu lack the natural protection of skin, which is the lack of melanin, exposure to these rays will make them more and more prone to developing more and more kinds and variety of skin cancer. Now the Kana'anu race will be dying and are dying at a faster rate, and the devil knows that. And here's what's so very interesting. Most of the monies that when they be raising, they be doing these things on TV now, like with that little midget boy or whatnot that has some disease and he's lip syncing everything, and it's really like a ploy so that people can feel like some pathos, some feeling for him. So they're gonna be giving their money towards his cause and more money to really to investigate and to try to solve all these rare skin conditions, because the white man is a minority. You understand? So the same white man who's destroying the earth, polluting the earth and destroying the ozone layer, has initiated his end and the rapid increase of diseases amongst himself, and skin cancer and disease, and a lot of the other byproducts of the old time leprosy. And now he wants to get the whole sympathy of the whole world about his situation, but yet he is trying to destroy places in Africa and other places around the world, and pollute other places where people were healthy, where they were born with dominant genes. So he's just trying to destroy the dominant gene people, but in that process he has caused his own destruction, but yet all the media, all the attention goes for the minority. You understand? Which is the white folks, the European people. Just something doesn't seem very just about that. But be that as it may, that's why you will find that that the Canaanites, or the Caucasus Asians, the white supremacy, and all of their slaves, are trying to find ways of regenerating tissue. They're trying to rearrange genetic codes. This is why the big thing about the genome, the human genome. You understand? Even ones like Imam Isa and other ones cracked that code, and Francis Cress Wells and others cracked the code, made that connection between things, and the European is not admitting it publicly, but secretly he understands that if we can just rearrange genetic codes, if we can regenerate tissue, if we can breed by way of test tube babies, stem cells, artificial insemination, even male pregnancies, and a large number of life-saving techniques. It reminds me of that song that Aretha Franklin sung, "Is there a place for the hopeless sinner that will hurt all mankind just to save his own?" Is there a place for the hopeless sinner that would hurt all mankind, the sinner that cannot receive the true Christ, cannot receive the true humanity of Christ, cannot receive Jesus Christos as that resurrected black man, but would try to destroy and hurt all mankind, even to crucify the Savior again, to crucify Christ again, just to save his own? Is there hope for such a being? Not in I book. He's hopeless. You understand? He is also pushing interracial marriages. This is another technique. You understand? This is why all of a sudden, white men and white women seem to, oh, I love black people. You understand? He's pushing, and some of them don't even understand really what they're doing, because a lot of it is society programming. He is also pushing interracial marriages, especially their preferred kind is white males to black females. They like that better than the Barack Obama black males to white females. You understand? But they like the white males to black females so that he can breed. He's trying to breed a stronger seed. He's trying to breed a stronger race. Basically, according to all the evidence, the Canaanite is a walking disease. You understand? He is a walking disease, not just because of his physicality, but because of his aspirituality and his mentality, and he needs to be saved from his very self. But we wanted to give a little more detail on leprosy, the physical aspects of understanding the medical imperatives here. These are things that we should and must understand. You understand, concerning health. This is a health issue. You know what I'm saying? It's a health issue. Seeing that he has a disease. He is a disease that he does not want to own up to. We have to be proactive and recognize this and assist him. You understand? Just like the priests have to pronounce, this is clean, this is unclean. Do this, don't do this. You understand? And we have to take control of the matter, because this is what the covenant gives us certain responsibility. So leprosy, just to sum this up and return now to the Schofield, we wanted to put that into the exhibit right there, and we want to just return to the Schofield just to kind of wrap up on these 3 chapters. These particular 3 chapters that cover the Sabbath 28th, well, the 27th and the 28th. Mainly the Sabbath 27th introduces, that's chapter 13, which we're at right now, where it speaks about leprosy is a sin. It speaks of leprosy is connected with sin, chatiyat, because chatiyat means missing the mark. In other words, the recessive genes are medically sinful in the sense that they do not have the recessive dominant characteristic. They have a recessive characteristic. So leprosy scripturally speaks of sin, as being in, and I know this is from a biblical perspective, and connect this with what we just touched on from a medical, making a medical link of the old-time leprosy and the byproduct diseases, skin diseases, and other type of diseases, such as everything from shaving bump to eczema, that's also connected with it. That leprosy speaks of sin as being one in the blood. Firstly, in the blood. Secondly, it becomes overt in loathsome ways. See, even this Bible, the compilers, they understood. They didn't go into elephantitis and all these other most dangerous diseases. But by expressing, secondly, it becomes overt, not covert, not seen, but it becomes seen and manifested in loathsome ways. Thirdly, it's incurable by human means. But as we just mentioned, that the European is trying all sort of techniques to try to cure leprosy. He's trying to do genetic gene splice and stem cell research, all other kind of stuff to help out with cancers, help out with diseases that he majoritively is affected by, while other people just need clean water. But he can't build no clean water wells or give the people the money and the technology to build no clean water wells someplace, because he don't want the competition from these black people or Africans or even Asians, you understand, in other parts of the world. So we have to understand the selfish madness, you understand, and put it in check. We have to bring it under the cross. Now the antitype is, as applied to the people of God now, is sin. The antitype of leprosy is chatiyat, or sin, and we touched on this earlier, demanding self-judgment, and sins which demand confession and cleansing. In other words, the same thing when we deal with the white man's physical type of leprosy and recessive genes. First of all, there needs to be self-judgment. There needs to be chastisement. Because a lot of the racism and a lot of the inhumane things that have been done in white supremacy by white folks over the last 400 plus years, the global injustices, a lot of it, the majority of it, emanates from this envy and jealousy he has, and this psychological spiritual problem that he has when he looks at himself and he looks at all the other people. When you look at the land that he has in Europe, the barren land, and he looks at everybody else's good land, and this basically causes this envy, this jealousy, and he goes forward to kill, to steal, you understand, to lie, to kill, and to steal. Now he has to basically confess in order to even have a hope of cleansing. What he's trying to do to cure these things by human means won't work, because the cure has not been given to him. You understand? It's been given to Christ and those who are of the true Christ. And if he cannot accept that Christ is black in his humanity, then he deserves everything that he get. And then we have spiritual lepers. Those black folks, we have a lot of black folks who have spiritual leprosy, which is another very interesting form of leprosy that we will like to do another teaching where we can touch on that. But moving on now, in the gospel, the leper does nothing. The type of gospel salvation and the points are this, that the leper does nothing. Romans 4 verse 4 to 5. Secondly, the priest seeks the leper. The priest has to go and check out what's going on with the leper, not the leper, the priest. Luke 19 and 10. Thirdly, without the shedding of blood there is no remission. Hebrews 9 and 22. You understand? In other words, like some people say, why is this cracker race so crazy? Because they know what they should have gotten. Without the shedding of blood there is no remission. Fourthly, you understand? If Christ be not raised, your faith is in vain. In other words, if the true Christ, the black Christ, the true Christ in his true humanity rise not up and becometh not that symbol, the truth, then one's faith as Christian and in eggs and Easter bunny and all the rest of that, all that is in vain. 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and 17. So this may be a little unusual of message for so-called Easter Sunday, you understand? But I think it's appropriate because they always have these white Easter bunnies hopping around, right? That was just the kind of leprous Easter bunnies hopping around. But the connection with that the connection with that, we need to bring this up to chapter 16. Just scroll up to chapter 16 right here to get through these three chapters, 13, 14, and 15. There's the bird slain, the symbol of the bird slain, and the live bird we touched on. The live bird is dipped in blood and released, and this presents the two aspects of salvation found in Romans chapter 4 verse 25, quote, that he was delivered for our offenses and raised again for our justification. He was raised again for our righteousness. And when we see the King of Kings upon the throne of David in Ethiopia in that prophetic age, this is Christ, the anointed, being raised again. This image and this person of Christ being raised again for our justification, to bring us into right alignment with the Almighty. This is why Rastafari is the key. Then the second matter is the earthen vessel. The earthen vessel, or the pottery. You understand? The potter's vessel. You understand? It signifies the humanity of Christ on even a physical level. If you ever look at pottery, pottery is made from that reddish brown. You understand? That reddish brown clay. And that reddish brown clay, just like the reddish brown we find in ancient Egypt, the wall paintings for the complexion of black people. You understand? Black people, which can be reddish brown, it can be caramel, it can be black, it can be blue black, but the essential color, the medium color, is that reddish brown. It can be lighter or it can be darker. Now the earthen vessel, the vessel here of, as we're in Leviticus chapter 14, it typifies the humanity of Christ. And when it says the humanity of Christ means his human characteristic. He had kingly nappy hair. He had curly hair. You understand? He had a complexion that's just like wood. You know the wood, and you know what color wood is. I'm not talking about that sand down garbage. I'm talking about real wood. Real wood. You understand? Real wood has a black man's complexion. Even the matzah. The matzah of Fasika and Passover, it has a black man's complexion. The earthen vessel, they sang right here in the footnote on page 144, it typifies the humanity. When we say humanity, it's saying his Ethiopianness, or to say his negritude, to say his blackness. You understand? And now the running water, it typifies the Holy Spirit, the Memphis Caduce, as the Spirit of life, Romans 8:2. That he was put to death in the flesh, but quickened by the Spirit. He was put to death in the flesh, but he was quickened by the Spirit. 1 Peter 3:18 is the reason for this season, as we this Melkam Tinsai. Actually, this should be considered Melkam Tinsai. You understand? Or the resurrection. You understand? The resurrection Sunday. But they tell you Easter, Aster, and you got to really understand, well, why do they say Aster? Aster is a star. If you look in our Sabbatical Studies, page 5, next to 29, Kamotu Bechala Acharei Mot, there's an asterisk. If you look at Easter, take off the E, you have Aster. Aster is the Ethiopic and true way of saying Esther. So we have Aster. Now if we go to the page 7, the asterisk says that portions marked with an asterisk can be added to the following week's readings. So in this particular week, Sabbatical reading, we're going to do just that. We're adding that to the Sabbatical reading. So from 29 and 30 is what we're going to touch on henceforth after this. 29 and 30. And when it says Kamotu Bechala, even though the context says the two sons of Aaron, but also Motu could signify his death too, his singular death. This is a very interesting mystic here. We're going to touch it after pause for the cause and move forward. Once again, Melkam Tinsai Christos Adere Sachu Be Jesus Christos Le Negus Neges Kubur